Janet Salopek, the founder of Salopek and Associates, an organization that specializes in human resources, strategy, and board governance. Extensive experience. Some absolutely awesome individuals are part of that team, and it is a delight to be able to work with them on an ongoing basis. Salopek and Associates has a primary focus on workforce planning, and we all know how critical that is for our industry sectors, as well as attraction and retention strategies, which is today's topic. And she is a board member for Tourism Calgary, and she's also an instructor at the University of Calgary. So you've got someone that has deep understanding of HR issues and needs.
So I've got 40 minutes, and I have 40 minutes to talk to you about the employer value proposition. And I just got to get my technology working here, right? Oh.
You lost the mouse. You need a packet.
Okay. Well, before while they're working on the technical, I just want to just talk very generally about the employer value proposition. As I said, we do a lot of work in both the not-for-profit sector and the corporate sector. But when I go into organizations and I'm talking to the leaders, I'm talking to the DDs, I'm talking to the managers, I often ask them, how can we help you? You know, what can we do for you? And sometimes they'll sort of look at me and say, well, we don't know what we don't know, right? And we go, okay. But one of the questions I like to ask them is, what keeps you awake at night? What keeps you awake at night? And when I ask that question, I hear all sorts of things. One time I heard this owner was carrying around all of his files in his case, and he was terrified that he was going to lose somebody's employee information and or leak something that he shouldn't leak. But often we'll hear that one of the things that are my biggest fear is losing my best people. And so when we hear that, that begins the wonderful conversation around the employer value proposition and allows us to start beginning to work with them on their talent strategy and their retention strategy. And so that's where we want to talk today with respect to the employer value proposition. It's all about, how do I keep my very best talent? And how do I make sure I don't lose people that are really valuable to our organization? I'd just like to have a show of hands to see how many have been with their organization for 1 year or less. Wow. Wow.
So you have them on the phone. You just press that menu button.
Okay. Which button? I need the help of my technical geek. Adam, sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. I can't believe I just called him a geek. Sorry, Adam.
I'm proud of it.
Wow, look at the number of people in the room, 1 year or less, so they're new to their organizations. How about 3 years or less? 3 years. How about people in the room that have been with their organization for over 4 years? Wow. Wow. I want to ask you, but I've got to be careful that what's keeping you there? But what I'd like you to do is reflect on that, because we are going to share some of that as we go through the morning. So that's amazing that we have so many people in the room that have been with their organization for 4 years or more. We're in a recession. We hear every day about people that are losing their jobs. And then we wonder, why are we here talking about retention? Because we have learned from the previous recession that things will eventually turn around, and potentially we could be in a situation where our good people have decided that they're going to leave us and search for new jobs. So what we really have to pay attention to and understand that as the economy rebounds, we could be at risk at losing some of our best people. And so when we talk about the employer value proposition, we always have to be reminded, even though we're laying people off every day, what are we doing for people that are left behind, and how are we treating them? Because once things pick up, they will make choices. And they may decide that, you know what, I don't really like the experience I've had here over the past year. I don't like the way I was treated. I didn't like the way they treated people when they left. So I may decide and go look for another job. So as employers, as managers, as owners of our businesses, we really need to be paying attention to how are we treating our people? What's important to us as an organization? And make sure that we're staying true to that, because our people are watching and our people are experiencing. And they may not have a choice today whether or not they decide to look for another job. But when things pick up, they will definitely have choices. So that employer value proposition and what we present to our employees, so very, very important. So what we want to do this morning over the next 40 minutes is really talk about the importance of the employer value position. Why is it important to define who we are and make sure that we live it? We live it every day. We live it in all the messages that we give, in everything that we do. Why is that important? And that's that walking the talk. And then more importantly is, how do we measure? How do we say, okay, I'm doing what I said I was going to do? So how do we do that? And what can we take away as far as tips to make sure that we are walking the talk? And then the importance of one size does not fit all. In fact, today, the retention strategy is all about uniqueness. How are we different as an organization from other companies? Many of the companies and the organizations that we deal with are small to medium-sized growing organizations or not-for-profits who can't afford to compete on the dollar. They say we can't afford to pay what the oil and gas sector pay. So that's why the value proposition is so important, because you're going to compete at a different level. You're going to compete on your culture. You're going to compete on what you offer everybody with respect to the experience they have when they come to work for you. And that's the value proposition. So what is the employer value proposition? You may have called it, you may have heard it said the EVP as an acronym. It's really our brand. It's how we position ourselves in the community. It's how we position ourselves in our social media. It's when people see our logo or our name, they go, gosh, yes, I've heard about them. I've heard about them as a great employer. I really want to go work for them because they've heard your story. Organizations do a lot of work on marketing their organization. That's their brand. What we're finding is we need to work very closely with those marketers because we want to capture that brand. And when we talk to our employees or we talk to prospective employees about what it's like to work at your organization, it matches the brand. We're consistent on who we are. We're consistent about the values that are important to us. And we live and walk to who we are. So we make sure we're true to the image that we present to the community as to who we are as an organization. So as soon as people see your name or your brand, they get it. And they say, yeah, I think that would be a great place to go and work. That's your employer value proposition. It's the messaging that you give to your employees about why do they want to come and work for you. We do a lot of recruiting, and the first thing somebody will say to us, tell me about that organization. Why would I want to go and work for them? It's really important that we capture that, right? We capture that living essence of what it's like to be a part of that organization. And then that's the way we get people in, and we make sure that we live it. So that's the way we can keep our people. And we make sure that we're true to who we are. Because people make choices when they come and work for you. We all do. And we all want to go to work for organizations that match our own values. So it's really important that we be clear as employers as to what those values are so people can make that choice when they decide, when they're going to come and work for you. Most of us in this room can't compete on the dollar. So really, it's important to define how you are different from other not-for-profits and what you can offer your employees. And then again, stay true to that offer. It really helps us keep our good people. People spend 8-10 hours at work. They want to stay, and they will stay working for organizations where they feel there's a good match for them. So again, making sure that you're defining what that looks like when you're bringing people into your organization and making sure you stay true to it, really big part of your strategy. And if you correctly define who you are and what you have to offer, you then can go out and ask your employees, are we delivering to what we said we were going to deliver? So that's where you can do that measurement piece, right? So if you get really good clarity on that, you can then go and measure it. And it also helps you to establish your people priorities. So if you have to make choices in your organization and you've really defined clearly who you are and what you have to offer, then it's easier to decide, should I offer this program or that program? What social activity should we be doing? So, it helps you make choices because you've called out what's important to you and your organization. We do a lot of work with IT companies, and the value proposition is interesting in the IT industry right now. And we go in, and as soon as I go into an IT company, a lot of times I can feel their value proposition. They've got an open environment, they've got games, they've got their lunchroom is filled with games, it's filled with a pool table. They obviously have an environment that attracts a certain person, right? That's part of who they are. Would I particularly want to go and work for an organization, or would that be a good fit for me? Maybe not. But for the younger generation, the tech generation, who really, that's how they strive. Don't ask them to sit at a desk and work on a computer all day. They want to be active. They want to be out doing things. They want to be playing the games. They want to be connecting with their people. So that organization creates that environment. They create that opportunity for people, and that's part of who they are. And you can feel it as soon as you go in. And so that's all about that value proposition and what it looks and feels like. Just from the survey data, and I think this is part of what we do when we go in and talk to people to say how we can add value. 73% of CEOs report that one of the things that they're most concerned about is, are they going to be able to keep their key skills? Are they going to be able to keep the talent that they need? And particularly as things turn around in the economy. They're going to be worried, and they are worried about whether or not they're going to see an exit. So paying attention to this value proposition as part of their strategy is going to be critical and key. It's not going to be about the dollars. It's going to be about the culture. It's going to be about the environment. It's going to be about what they have to offer as an organization. It can also be about the way they give back to the community. That's part of your value proposition too, right? How do we fit into the community, and what does that look like as far as giving back? That, to a large extent, is part of the value proposition as well. Let's look at Starbucks. What do you think about when you hear the word Starbucks, and what's the value proposition? Why don't you just have a little chat with the person sitting next to you? When you see the word Starbucks, what do you think of as an employer? And just have a little discussion, and then let's talk about that as part of the value proposition. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes. What's the value proposition of Starbucks? And so, the employer value proposition at Starbucks to somebody that's going to want to come and work there, it's about not only the intrinsic, but the extrinsic. It's also, if I knew I was going to go for Starbucks, I know that if I want to work there as an employee, I know that I'm going to be empowered also. I'm going to be able to make decisions about the customer when they come up. I'm going to be allowed to stand there and talk about coffee and live and share the story about Starbucks, right? Customer focused and being really into coffee and not worrying about the long lineup necessarily behind you, so you can make that connection with the customer. If that's important to you, you're going to like working at Starbucks. Also, if you like to be able to maybe work and go to school, get good experience, I'm going to know that Starbucks is a great place to go and work because I'm going to get some really good training. So all of those things are important to the value proposition to Starbucks because that's how they get people That's how they get students into their organization, and that's how they keep them. So they just need to make sure, though, that they're true to that, though. So everything they do with respect to the brand, how they develop their people, how they talk to their people, has got to be consistent. So when we get together, or they get a focus group together to say, what is it like to work at Starbucks? They're hearing consistent messaging. So really, really important to be able to stay true to your brand. And so when we do talk about Starbucks, we all sort of get the same feeling, right, about what it's like to work and be part of that organization. What are some other organizations that have got really good employer value propositions? Any ideas? What comes to your mind? WestJet, yes. What's the value proposition at WestJet?
Everyone's an owner.
Everyone's an owner. What else? It's fun to work at WestJet. It's fun. You know, they're always cracking a joke, right? They talk off the cuff, sort of. They don't go up with script. That's part of what you do when you go to work for WestJet. Like, you're allowed to, and you're given permission to be yourself. That's the value proposition. And isn't it interesting that the organizations that we've talked about here with strong employer value proposition, what else do they have? They've got a really strong branding with their logos, right? So they have done a really good job of matching their employment brand with their marketing brand. And that's probably one of the first things I learned as I started working with organizations on their employer branding is, oh my gosh, we got to get the marketers in the room, right? So that was part of the work that we did, and how we would begin working for them, is making sure that whatever we were talking about on the employment side, the employer side, was so consistent with the marketing brand. And a lot of organizations spend a lot of time talking about their marketing brand, but sometimes they forget then about, okay, how does that fit with our employment brand, right? So as a takeaway from this session, if you do nothing else, think about when you go back and having conversations within your organization about, gosh, you know, we spend dollars on marketing, but are we spending dollars on defining who we are as an employer? And a lot of the work actually is done through your marketing team, and you can just piggyback on that through as you develop your marketing brand. It's really, you know, about how we present ourselves. It's that linkage that we have with marketing. It's really about, how does it feel when we go in and work for an organization? What are the values? How do we do our work? Are we siloed? Do we work as a member of a team? Do we have fun? Do we give back to the community? So it's all that definition and that emotion, that passion that we feel about that organization that we're working for. And really, the important thing is we hear about employer value proposition and employee value proposition, and we go, well, what's the difference? The employer value proposition is, what is my organization promising to provide to me? And the employee value person and am I experiencing that when I step into the organization? And what you really want to make certain is that your employer value position matches and equals your employee value position. So what an organization is saying is exactly what I'm feeling when I go in and work for that company. Hence, it's really important that as organizations, we do that measurement piece. Are we walking the talk? Are we saying and doing what we said we were going to do? Many times when we go into work, the organization will say, we need you to develop that employer value proposition. You know, as HR practitioners, you can do that for us. And we always have to help an organization remember that, you know what? That's really not, we can help you define it, but it needs to be owned by the management, right? It's okay for us to help them define it, but really ownership has to be taken by the leaders at the top, because it's those people that help and make the experiences when we go in and actually go into work. It's them that can make the difference. So it's really not a strategy that's owned by HR. It's owned by the owners. It's owned by the leadership team. It's owned by the managers. We can help define it, but it's got to be owned by them. It forms the foundation of your talent strategy. So when you think about retention, pull it back further and think about talent. It's not only about how you're going to keep people in, but it's also about how you're going to attract people to your organization, how you're going to keep people to your organization, and how you're going to train and develop them. Because as you develop your value proposition, you're going to be thinking about what are the values that are important to our organization? What competencies do we need to attract and retain people? What type of personality is a good match for us? All of those aspects of your value proposition will also help you decide, when I'm going to train somebody, how do I want to train them? Am I going to go traditional, or am I going to do something a little bit different? And if your value proposition is that we are different, we create fun, we are an energetic and exciting place to do, you don't necessarily put everybody in a room and have them do study for 8 hours without interjecting a little bit of fun. So again, everything that you do has to be aligned with your value proposition. And so I really see that it's actually more than just a retention strategy, it's a whole talent strategy. And we've already talked about it. Also allow you to hold yourself accountable, because you're going to go in and ask people, and how are we doing? So how do you define a value proposition? Can I just ask in this room, how many people have had conversations with their managers, with their staff, with their about a value proposition? Is this something that's new, or is this something that you guys are, you started the conversation? Show of hands. How many have talked about value proposition? Okay. All right, good. So when we talk about the value proposition, we want to make sure that we make it part of the strategy, right? It's not a one-off conversation. It's linked to everything that we do. So that's where I'm saying you want to make sure that you're talking about what are our values, what are our competencies, what do we need to be doing to attract and retain the talent that we need. So it's tied into the bigger picture, always tied into the bigger picture. It's also, when you're developing your value proposition, you want to make sure that you go out and you ask your people, right? So what do they think about working for your organization? Why do they come and work for that? So as you start the conversation around value proposition, make sure you're going out and engaging your people. Why do they come here? Why do they stay? Make sure you're talking to your marketing people. Make sure that, because you need to be consistent, right? You can't have an employer plan that doesn't match your marketing plan. And make sure that each and everything that you do in either the social media, in your ads, every time you touch the outside world, the community, potential applicants, you're being consistent with your messaging. So key messaging, critically important as you develop your employer brand. And key messaging that's important with your marketing brand as well. One of the first pieces of work that I did around employer value proposition was I was working with the owner of a small oil and gas company. And he had built this organization from the ground up. And he said to me, I'm really passionate about who we are and how we do business. And he said, we've spent a lot of money and are currently spending a lot of money on that marketing brand, right? But he said, what I'm really curious about knowing is similar to what you just said. Are people actually joining us because of that? Because I need to know that, because I need to determine where I am going to get focused with respect to my HR programs, my HR processes, because I want to make sure that we're attracting the people that I want working in the business and that have the same values. Because if I know if I do that, I'm going to, one, get great work, because there's value alignment. And I know that I'm not going to be having a revolving door here because I'm going to be able to track and take. So he says, I need to spend some time on that, and I want you to help me do that. So one of the value propositions that he had, that he thought he had, was that people came to work for them because they were like a family-run business. High relationships, not a lot of bureaucracy, and people could make decisions and be accountable. That truly was important to him, right? And that was part of what he felt was the value proposition, right? So he said, go out and see whether or not is that actually right. So what we actually did is we brought in focus groups. So we brought in focus groups and we asked the questions. And it was really interesting what we found out. Do you know the number one reason why people were coming to work for him? What do you think it was? Blew us away. It was compensation. He was overpaying. He was overpaying. So he's going, wow. People, number one reason why they were coming to work there was because of compensation. And the second reason why they were coming to work for him and staying working for him was because of the relationship piece. Because they felt the family business. They felt the fact that they could be accountable. There wasn't a lot of red tape. So it was an eye-opener for him. Once he said, okay, now I know my HR program process, I really need to get a handle on my compensation. You know, because I don't want to compete just on salary. I want to compete because of that relationship piece, right? And so he made a fundamental decision then that he did need to get a better handle on his compensation programs, which was a good thing. And what he also found out is that as he grew his company, he had to make certain that he didn't create a lot of red tape for his managers as employees, because people came to work for him because they didn't want that. So that was probably, as we partnered with him, that was critical and key as we put together the people programs as well, because we had to create that environment to make certain that we didn't have a lot of red tape, because he would lose his people. I've partnered with that organization for 5 years. They're one of my toughest clients because of that relationship and that, you know, we don't want a lot of red tape. And when you're an HR person, I mean, you got to have some policies, you got to have some procedures, but we have to work really, really hard at making sure that we don't make that a political type environment, because he doesn't have turnover. He has people that are so loyal to him in this recession that the cuts that he had to make were actually surprisingly easy, because people so got it. They so got it, and do you know why they got it? Their values were aligned. He spends a lot of time paying attention to the value proposition with respect to, I want people working for me that have the same values. It's like a family-run business. And this is an organization that has 150 people. So it's not like it's a small company. They're fairly large, and they're able to do that because they're paying attention to that value proposition about things that are not just dollars and cents. It's about the experience that people have when they come and work for him. So, and you know, when we look at some of the things that he did as he put that strategy together, he's pretty consistent with respect to how he messages who they are, what they're all about. If you pull up his website, for example, it's all about relationships. You see lots of people. You see lots about their values. You see lots about safe work environments, people being accountable. It's so consistent. And yeah, his turnover is we don't recruit for them. We don't recruit for them because we don't have to recruit for them, because they're not experiencing turnover. And he's going to be able to keep his people, and he has been able to keep his people, even though he's had to cut hours and cut salaries. People have still stayed with him. And that's because he's done an excellent job on that value proposition. So how do you make sure then that you are walking the talk? That when you define it, as this owner defined it, that you're actually staying true to who you are and what you said you do. And so you can do this pretty easily. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, and you can do it yourselves. You can survey your people and keep it simple. Use SurveyMonkey. You know, it's as simple as asking 5 or 6 key questions about your values, about the work environment, about why people come and work for you. It's about 5 or 6 questions that are directly aligned. Can I say? Yeah, actually, I've got an exercise. I've got to go fast because I've got some exercises here that will help you get to that. So, and you monitor your retention statistics, so you keep track, right? So you know how you're doing. You do exit interviews, and in your toolbox, we've provided you with an exit interview example, and you do stay interviews, which to do a stay interview, just use the same types of questions that you use for your exit interview, but just rephrase them, right? So you can use similar questions, just rephrase them a little bit different with respect to the format. So yes, let's get to some of those about how do you get to the questioning about the value proposition. So just a few points so before we go there. Keep it simple with your surveying, and you can survey, short surveys more frequently, right? So as long as you're doing short surveys, you don't need to worry about surveying the death out of your people, but just keep them short. And actually, sometimes it becomes part of your culture to survey your people. Though. We want your feedback. That's how we engage you. So that actually becomes part of who you are and how you make sure that you're walking your talk. So as long as you pay attention to not overburdening them with, a questionnaire that takes 20 minutes to complete. Once you do your survey too, then do focus groups to drill down a little bit deeper. And I find that it's an excellent way to find out a bit more about why people stay, why they might be leaving, or why they might consider leaving. So again, those focus groups after you've done a survey, really important. Always ask for feedback, and make sure you're doing that benchmarking and that measuring. Here is what I would suggest with respect to the questions, okay? So I'd like you to, I'm gonna run out of time, but what I'd like to do is just give you a couple of minutes. Try these questions out. These are really good questions to ask your people, and it's amazing what you will get back as far as feedback. It allows them to talk. So, how would you complete the following sentences? The ideal of our company is that every person who works here, and let them just answer that question. To be a successful employee at our company, one must. Try the exercise. Do it at your table. What do you come up with? I'll give you just a couple of minutes because we're going to run out of time. So try these questions out, and what do you hear? Okay? I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Can I get everybody's attention? I wish we had more time because, you can learn a lot from your colleagues as you talk about this. But what's really exciting about this, too, if you've got good conversation, take this conversation back to your workplace, right? Have this conversation with your management group, with your managers. Get the excitement going about your value proposition. And to answer your question at this table here about what are some of the questions, so these are really good focus group questions, right? So get a group of people to ask a focus group. But you can also do this through the survey if that's going to fit your culture a little bit better. But I really do like a combination of survey and focus groups. But when you ask the question, ask it broad enough so that people will think and then provide you their perspective. So, you might ask this question in a survey and then give them 3 bullet points to sort of put in their answers. Do you know what I mean? Rather than pigeoning them with these are the script answers, you want to get people to talk about their experience, why they're excited about working for you, because that's the input you want as you build your employer value proposition. So getting that engagement, getting people talking about why they come and work there is really where you want to get to with respect to getting that definition around what your value proposition is. So the more chat time you can have within focus groups or just discussions is really, really important. The other really important thing as you define your value proposition is be careful who you ask, right? Who do you want to ask this question to? You want to ask them to employees. What employees do you want to engage in? Who do you want to engage in? Which of your employees? Your front line. Who else?
A players.
Your A players. Yes, your A players. Ask your A players, because if you're going to pay attention to anything, and I mean, this goes back to that one size does not fit all, right? I'm sorry, in today's world, We can't be everything to everybody, right? So if you're going to ask the questions and you've got only so many focus groups that you can ask, who are you going to get in that room? Your top performers, your top quartile. Make sure you're paying attention to them, right? And then make sure you live up to follow through. Take that data, go to your marketing department and say, this is what we're hearing. Is this the way we're projecting ourselves out in the marketplace? Is that the way we're projecting ourselves on social media? Because once we get them in here, we want to make sure that we're doing what we said we were going to do and make sure that you measure it, right? Do those retention statistics. Ask them those questions. And here is just, there's, with respect to your metrics, there's a benchmarking report that you can get from the HR Management Association. This is a little bit dated, the data on it, but they produce regularly benchmarking statistics. So you can purchase this data and it will give you some really good measurement percentiles to say how are we doing relative to what we hoped we were. So you can measure your voluntary turnover and then you can also look at your top quartile and make sure you're paying attention to your top quartile, because those are your top performers. And those are the ones, again, going back to my earlier side, that you're at risk of losing if you don't, when things start turning around. Make sure you ask the right questions. So it's easy to run a survey, but it's harder to make sure you're asking the right questions. So we included in your box some exit questions, but take those exit questionnaires, turn them around a little bit, and also consider doing stay interviews. How many here are doing stay interviews? Perfect. And when do you do them?
I try to do every month.
Every month? Oh, wow.
Every month, depending on, like, not for everyone, but a couple every month.
So you do a couple every month. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, good. And are you paying attention to who you do those to? Like, are you pretty strategic in who you pick to the, yeah, right. Perfect. You've got some sample questions in your toolbook. So just, I want to talk a little bit, because I've only really got 2 minutes now, about one size does not fit all, and I think we've talked about that. And again, 10 years ago, if I had been standing up here talking to you, I would have been saying, you know what, we've got to be consistent, we've got to be, you know, with respect to how we handle our policies and procedures, you know, your manuals are really important for consistency. And what I'd like to say today, it is really important that we still have policies and procedures. It's still important that we treat people fairly, but fairly does not have to be the same. And that's why organizations now are being strategic with respect to asking for input, to be quite honest, selecting who comes into focus groups. They're not worrying so much that, you know, Betty or Sue didn't get invited to sit in on the focus groups, because Betty and Sue really have checked out, you know, and I really don't want their feedback. I want that feedback from that person that was able to get us $100,000 in funding. And if I lose him or her next month, we're going to be in deep doo-doo. Like, we can't afford to lose our funders or whatever. Like, so it's really important to be strategic then when you think about who are you bringing in to ask for input. So, and the other thing is be nimble. If something doesn't working or if something isn't working, change the way you're doing it, right? And that's why it's really important to ask for that feedback, right? So if there's something in your culture that people don't like, maybe they don't like those, you know, Friday afternoons where everybody has to come together and, you know, sort of do the group hug sort of thing. If that's not working for you, don't stop doing it, right? Do something differently. So be nimble. And again, this quote just reinforces the fact that don't paint everybody with the same brush, right? Find out strategically, you know, what keeps your top talent? Does that mesh with who you say you are? And make sure then that you measure and that you're doing what you said you were going to do. What I'd like you to do is reflect today on what you've learned on the value proposition and take something, if you just one thing from today, and apply it when you go back to the workforce, right? Even if it's a conversation, a question, take something from the value proposition discussion and try it out at back at the workplace. And just in summary, talent strategies really require that retention plan. Your value proposition is such a very, very critical and key part of not only your retention strategy, but your talent strategy. It defines who we are. It will help employees decide, why am I going to go work for you, and why do I want to stay working for you? It doesn't have it, and remember, within your organization, you will differentiate yourself if you are different. So make sure that when you define that value proposition, there is a differentiating feature there. What's different from our not-for-profit versus the not-for-profit down the street? What are we offering that's different? And make sure that you measure to ensure that you're doing what you said you were going to do. Thank you very much.
So Landis, you were talking about in your presentation about bonuses, and I think part of that comes to my mind immediately is pay for bonus. I'd like to know how many not-for-profits actually have bonuses in their compensation structure, because that, in my mind, has been taboo in the past. I want to know if that's changed.
We have a bonus structure, and it's funny because we're actually in the middle. We're with Junior Achievement. We're in the middle of kind of reviewing how we do it, but we basically have measurable outputs for each staff member, and it's based on a percentage of their salary. And we often end up paying out maybe not a full bonus, but a percentage of that amount almost every year. Like to the point where I definitely, if I was looking at another job offer, I would consider a percentage of my bonus as my current compensation. It's pretty guaranteed. It's not. I mean, it's not like we put it on our CRA reports or anything that we have a bonus structure, but it definitely is in all of our reports as part of our personnel cost. But it's not broken out. Like it wouldn't be out there as public knowledge that we have a bonus structure. Yeah.
Until now.
I was just going to say that at my place of employment, we sometimes, because of the funder issue, we maybe give an extra week vacation as a one-time bonus, so stuff like that. So try to give either time off or learning development opportunities and whatnot, as opposed to a monetary bonus. Okay. Yeah.
We do a very hit and miss sort of bonus structure. It depends on how much money we have in the budget in a given year, what's gone on in that particular year, and the board sort of approves it. It might be a small stipend, but it's kind of nice at the end of the year when you're not expecting it. And yeah, it's really dependent on how much money we have in the budget in a given year and how much we're looking into next year. This year, we're not giving any bonuses.
We have what we call a goodbye afternoon, which is when somebody has done a great job or has been working really hard or has taken on extra responsibility. I just go in and say, goodbye, we'll see you tomorrow or on Monday. And what has happened, which just really brought joy to my heart, was that it's their colleagues that are recommending goodbye days for each other, rather than, hey, look what I did. And that's a real, to me, a symbol of a team, good team.
So I've come into an organization with a culture that was very, how shall I put this politically correct, very laissez-faire about work, and trying to create productivity and efficiency while still maintaining that fun atmosphere that they appreciated, has been really difficult. And for people that we've brought in that are new, the expectations are clear. Not my old employees, but the employees that were there previously have there's a lot of resistance. It's always resistance to change. And I'm just wondering, like, a lot of the strategies that I've heard are about bringing your employees forward, and when you have these naysayers who just, well, this sucks. Like,
We've done it this way before.
Yeah, and it's not fun, and you're just really difficult to work with, and nothing else will work other than to go back to that laissez-faire work style, which we can't have. How do you bridge that? Because the compensation, like, we talk about a mixed bag of compensation, and it's still not. How do you work around that?
So maybe some things, great question. Maybe some things that you could think about is to engage the person in conversation.
what are your ideas of what we can do? If they are that, I don't care, I've told you already, at some point you need to leave that individual where they are, and maybe an exit strategy is what you need to look at for them. Now, if that's not part of your culture, then you do need to either put them to the side where they have less influence with others in the organization, or step by step, piece by piece, small pieces, encourage them to get involved. They've been allowed to do that in the past. That's the issue. So you're changing the culture and the strategy of the company, and it will take a period of time. Another great thing that happens is sometimes the enthusiasm from the new employees will bring those individuals along. Try some of those. It's hard. It doesn't happen overnight. Yeah.
Actually, it's a classic change management process, and it does take a long time. But going back to the earlier conversation, just to tie it together about the requirement, of course, from the funders and the constraints that that places on compensation or on recognition, somewhere along that continuum, and that goes a bit to the change management as well, there can be a very healthy conversation with a funder about outcomes. So if we are accountable for the outcomes, not the output, but the outcomes, how can we then tie it to having the productivity that is needed? So it's a different conversation. It's not just give me $10 to run a program. It is with the $10, if I deliver 100% plus 2%, I would like to have this component of recognition. And I think that there is the time now, and there is the appetite from a social justice perspective, from a real fact that money is tight, doesn't matter what we do, that if we measure the outcomes, we can have a healthier conversation. That then drives the change internally through a real change management process, through a disciplinary process, because at the end of the day, the fact that I've been with you for 15 years doesn't mean that I'm a stellar employee. It could be that I'm so scared of never finding anybody else to employ me that I'm gonna stay there until you drive me out on a hearse. So, you know, accountability kicks in as well. So that's my 2 cents on that, and I am passionate.
I'm just wondering about the fairness piece. So if you're trying to be fair to your employees, you're going through this process, and there are some, like I heard a lot of I heard a lot of this A, B, C sort of people, and you know those people in your organization. In a small organization, when you have 8 to 10 or 12 people, identifying an A becomes the ED's pet. And how do you keep the fairness while maintaining some of these things that you're talking about?
You really want to go down that road? I think we should take that offline, because I heard something in there that really is not a pretty picture.
Yeah.
But you
So
know, on
we
the,
can have
Janet
that
but on the
conversation.
fairness, on the fairness issue, I really believe it's helping your people understand that it doesn't mean the same. Like
right.
that was a culture 10 years ago, 5 years ago. But honestly, because there's so many generations in our workplace today, we need to help our people understand that it doesn't mean the same, because a 20-year-old's not going to value the same as a 50-year-old, right? So it's helping our people understand why it's not all the same, right? And they'll get it. They'll get it. But you got to engage them in that conversation. You have to help them understand.
And you need to be prepared for difficult conversations.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, if I'm going to engage Janet once, twice, 10 times, there won't be any limits. And it doesn't matter how long Janet's been around, but because you cannot have that kind of differential of performance. So difficult conversations are really part of everything that we talk about.
Especially with a small group, like if you got 8 or 10 in your employee group, like often just saying, let's get the elephant out of the room, like let's put it on, like let's get it out, right? Because until we can actually talk about it, we can't really shift and move. So it's being up, and it's your leaders being up for those difficult conversations. But if you're not having them today, you're not probably keeping your good people, because your good people want that out on the table.
They want
and
that
be
out.
able to
They
talk.
want to be part of that
Yeah.
conversation, absolutely.
And fair doesn't mean equal, it means fair,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of people confuse fairness with equality, and it's not the same thing. Why shouldn't a person who's a top performer have more flexibility than someone who's struggling with attendance, performance, social relationships within an organization? I am. And to answer your first question, fire them.
Fire them. Yeah,
At least Adam called the elephant in the room that
Yeah.
I was circling around.
yeah.
That costs a lot of money.
Yes, it does. Yes,
It does, it does. However-
But it will cost more to the organization in relationship with funders,
Yes.
with clients, with the public, not to.
But you know, I don't know, it does cost a lot of money, but sometimes when you force the conversation, people make choices themselves. Because all of a sudden, it's uncomfortable to be. And they will choose that, you know, and it's about that value problem. This is no longer where I feel comfortable, so if I don't feel comfortable, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna make a choice.
I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. I wanted to thank our excellent panelists, and Nicole, my partner in crime. I can't do this without you.